In today's video, we're going to learn how to put a jigsaw puzzle together. Now, you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, I'm watching this video to learn how to deal with anxiety and panic and depression. But this is a continuation of my jigsaw puzzle theory. And so we're going to go over how you actually put a puzzle together and then how that relates to how God can bring healing in your life. I'll just tell you, several years ago, I was putting together a jigsaw puzzle because I just love to do that. It relaxes me. And all of a sudden, this whole lesson started coming into my head about how do I put a jigsaw puzzle together. It ended up just being like an entire lesson that I'm going to tell you about today. But I thought, now, why am I getting a lesson on how to put a jigsaw puzzle together? I'm not a teacher, I'm not a speaker, I'm not a preacher, but here it is. I just tucked it away in the back of my head and didn't really forget about it. It was always there, but I wondered what it was all about. And then several years later, when my counselor mentioned what we've talked about in the past, how when we have wounds and trauma and things like that, our mind can break those wounded emotions up into pieces and then scattered around the brain. And as soon as she told me that, I went, that's where this teaching fits. So today, we're going to talk about how do you put together a jigsaw puzzle. If any of you like jigsaw puzzles, you probably know the answer to a lot of my questions. But the first one is, what's the first thing you do when you're starting a big jigsaw puzzle? And the answer is, you find the corner pieces. There should be 4 corner pieces, okay? So you always go through the puzzle and you try to find those. This correlates right to when I was a kid. I grew up in the Foursquare Gospel Church. Now, I am not promoting a church or any group or anything, but I remembered from my childhood the 4 roles of Jesus that the Foursquare Gospel Church believed in. And it was Jesus as Savior, Baptizer, Healer, and Coming King. Now that was stuck in my brain because they taught me this when I was a kid. And they believed that those were the 4 main roles that Jesus serves in our life. So when I got that lesson about putting a jigsaw puzzle together, I thought, well, these 4 squares correlate to the 4 corners. So there you go. So to me, the first step in finding healing from God for anxiety, panic, and depression is letting Jesus be these things in your life. And that's an easy thing to do. Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Simple as that. All you got to believe is who Jesus is and what he did. Acts 16:30-31 says, and this is a story of when Paul and Silas were in prison and an earthquake came and it took down all the walls of the prison. And this man who was a guard comes running in and says to Paul and Silas, because he was so scared because of what had happened, he said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. So it's as simple as that. If you want God to do this healing work in your life that we're going to talk about, all you got to do is believe in Jesus, who he is and what he did. So what's the next thing you do when you're going to put a jigsaw puzzle together? You look for the edge pieces. I always go through, even if I've done a 5,000 piece puzzle, and I think the most I've ever done is a 7,000 piece. So you go through that whole box and you find all the edge pieces, okay? How does this correlate to the way God brings healing into your life? In Isaiah 60:18, it says, violence shall no longer be heard in your land, and neither wasting nor destruction within your borders. But you shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. So while we're going through this healing process of allowing God to put our jigsaw puzzle together, He puts up a protective barrier around us, and that is represented by all the edge pieces. So you got your four corners, you got your edge pieces. Where do you go from there? The next thing you do is you pick out pieces that are easily recognizable. Like I picked this one out. You can easily see that this is somebody's shoe. If I can find the other pieces to that shoe, then I can start putting it together. So in God's healing plan, this represents the unresolved issues that we had talked about. The rejection, abandonment, guilt, shame, hopelessness, all of those. You can start now, if you've been doing the BLT process, you're starting to recognize these when they pop up. So when you start recognizing them, you pick them out and say, okay, Lord, let's take this through the process and help me bring healing into this area. That's what recognizable pieces, how it fits into God's healing plan. The next thing you do when you're down to, and still got all these hundreds of pieces and you can't figure it out, you look for similar colors and patterns, things that look familiar or they look like they belong together. I just picked out of this kids puzzle that I have. They have the same kind of colors, and I thought, well, gosh, somehow these have to fit in together, right? Well, sure enough, they do. And so that's where I start looking next, is to see where I can fit things together that are similar. And in God's treatment plan, this is where you start. Now you're starting to get healing in these really tough areas. And then you say, God, I'm going to start trusting you. You've done such a great job in bringing healing in these areas. I'm going to start trusting you with these little things. We're getting down to real details now, okay? As you find healing in your life from trauma and wounds and abuse, then you start trusting God to look at more of the details. And then when I'm down to the last pile of pieces that I just can't figure out where they go because they don't look familiar to me, they don't seem to go together, I start looking at the actual shape of the puzzle. I forget about what's on here because I can't recognize it, okay? So I start looking at the shape of it. I call these knobs, and these are sockets. I actually looked it up to find out what they were called because I didn't know what they were called. I start looking at these and I look at the holes I have in my puzzle, and I said, the next one has to have at least 2 knobs. So I go through every puzzle piece that has 2 knobs and I try to fit it in. Now in God's treatment plan, this is where you're getting into the very, very detailed work that only God can do. And so that's where you have to really trust Him to say, there's stuff inside of here, people that have wounded me or hurt me in ways that I've even hid from myself. So I'm going to stop trying to figure out what the ugly piece is, and I'm going to trust God to just help me to figure out where this goes, how it fits, and how to find healing in this area. Now, that's how you put a puzzle together, okay? Now, I have put lots of puzzles together in my lifetime. This happens to be one I put together recently. And I'm not showing you the picture because there's a point I want to make. Now, I use my same process. I found the corners. I found the edge pieces. Then I looked at familiar shapes and patterns, recognizable pieces. And then finally, down to the last, I went looking at the knobs and the sockets to see how they went together. If this was my healing process, I would have trusted God to get down to those very, very details. I'm going to tell you what my theory is that I've come up with in all these years of using this with my daughter and my granddaughters in going through this jigsaw puzzle treatment for anxiety, depression, and panic. Imagine that I walked into a room of a bunch of little kids, and I had this picture, and on the back of this picture is the ugliest monster you can possibly imagine. And I flip it around, and I show them that ugly, ugly monster, and it's big, and it's ugly. Those kids would not like it. Some of them might even cry and run from the room. That's why I call this box where we stuff our unresolved emotions and hurts and pains. I call it the monster box because this is where we're hiding that picture of the monster, okay? But the reason God's treatment plan works is because he takes something that's big and ugly and he helps you put it together piece by piece by piece. If I was to show the kids one ugly piece of a monster and put it on a board, let's say I had a board back here, and the kids would say, well, that's kind of ugly, kind of dark, kind of slimy looking, but it wouldn't scare them as much. And that's why God's plan works, because he goes bit by little bit by little bit until he can help you in a safe, protected environment to put your jigsaw puzzle monster together. So when it's finally all put together, even though it is a monster, it doesn't seem as bad because you've looked at it piece by piece by piece. And God has brought healing into every one of those areas. I have one last thing to share with you because this just fits so good with all of this. I want to show you just different things that God does in my life. Like I told you how he put this whole teaching together for me before I even knew what it was all about. When I was putting these anxiety lessons together to begin with, I told you I started out just trying to help my daughter and my granddaughters deal with their anxiety and panic, okay? Just shortly after I was putting these lessons together, my sister gave me this t-shirt. She didn't know I was putting these together. She didn't know I had a whole theory on jigsaw puzzle pieces. She just knew I liked purple and that I liked to do jigsaw puzzles. To me, even when my granddaughter saw this shirt, because I was so excited, I knew God was talking through this shirt. I showed it to my granddaughters, and I looked at it, I said, look, this flower represents the beauty that God has brought out of our monster box of life. He made beautiful flowers out of it. And as I shared with my granddaughters, and as I'm sharing with you about how to find healing with God's help in putting these puzzle pieces together, those pieces, I hope and pray, will go out into other people's lives to create the beauty of this purple flower in their lives. And that's what I'm praying for you. Thank you.